Hi, this is Trevor Conquergood. Welcome to this week's RNK Software Club's video for the week. And the topic for this week is going to be a little bit about Turkey Talk and a little bit about how to customize your workspace. So to get started, I'm going to click on the library icon on the right-hand side and open up the free monthly designs category and look for the month of November and then the year November 2021. So these are the most recent monthly designs. And so I hover over the designs tab to see all of the designs. And so I thought I would bring in this kind of angry looking turkey face and put that on my screen. And maybe we'll just turn on the 3D to see kind of what it looks like. And I always think this design looks better on a black background. So why don't we just go ahead and change the background color from white to black. And that'll make our turkey look nice and scary looking. So this is my question for you guys. Have you learned how to use the Satin Path tool to create a fill stitch that's turning like this? I think a lot of times people, when they have a shape, and so let me just click on the design and ungroup everything, and then click on one of these eyes. And what I'm saying is, I see a lot of times people, when they have a shape, and recognize here, let's click on the artwork tool, recognize that this is just a piece of artwork in the shape of an eye. And a lot of times people click on the standard fill tool, and so it fills it in. But notice the difference between these two eyes and how this one is just a little bit more dimension because the stitch direction is turning from kind of this flattened angle out here to the opposite one over here, and it turns all the way around. And so if you're not sure how to do that or create that effect, what you would do is select your shape, and you need to choose the satin tool. Now, there's a variety of satin tools, all of these ones in the group. You could click on auto satin, and that will, put the satin lines in for you. Notice that it turns right away. Now, yes, it looks different than the one over here, and that's because when you use the Satin Path tools, the default setting is for a satin stitch. And maybe we need to kind of separate the word satin here because the tool in the software is a satin path, and it says over here satin path, but you can select a satin path and change the type of stitch pattern from a regular satin. So a satin generally means it only has stitches on the outer edges. And as this gets wider, and notice that it gets wider right about there, it starts to change. And now you can see a little bit of a split. So it's still doing a satin look, but because the stitches are getting so long, it's kind of splitting them in the middle. And we can take control of all of these things. Notice there's a tab right here that's called split. And when you click on it, you can see the parameters or the settings for the splitting. And if you wanted to, for example, have no split, you could say none. Now what that does is it does create some longer styles of stitches here. And so this is where oftentimes if I'm making something that's larger, and if we use our ruler to measure it to see just how wide this gets, it becomes almost 0.4 of an inch. I usually do the small measuring in metric, and so let's just check that and see. It's over 10 millimeters wide, and that's quite long, almost half an inch. And so this is where, if you wanted to keep the satin look, you could introduce a split. Now, splits are either a middle split or the kind of most common one is the random. Random tries to minimize the view or the look of that split. If you wish that it split all the way to the end, you're like, well, I love that it split, but why does it stop here? It's because in the settings, there is a minimum and a maximum. So the minimum stitch length says don't make any stitches smaller than 1.2. You can make that bigger if you want to. Don't make anything smaller than 2. But it's the maximum being 7. So as your stitches come here, they're 5, now they're 6. When they reach 7, beyond that point, it's going to be split. If you wanted to make it split all the way to this end, maybe just try making that maximum 6 and see if that is enough. And so it's still kind of about the same spot. And so then we can try 5. Yeah, so at 5, it splits pretty much the whole thing. And here at the wider side, where it started to go longer than 10, notice that it's starting to do 2 splits now. Because, of course, we put the maximum at 5, and since it's longer than 10, it's got to split twice. Anyhow, notice that I didn't use that kind of stitching for the eyes. I chose something different. So yeah, when you click on the shape, instead of doing a satin fill, you can change the to a pattern fill, and there's all of the kind of standard pattern fills available. So pattern 1 and pattern 2, or any of these kind of smooth patterns, will give you a nice turning but yet textured look like that. And so this is, I guess, the difference between using a fill or a pattern fill and using a satin fill. Coming back to the beginning, when we had here, let's just click on the artwork tool. When we decided to convert into a satin path, I clicked on this one here, which is auto satin. And auto satin will instantly give you stitches, yes, but it doesn't allow you to interact with them as much as unless you would click on the shape tool. And now you can see the inclinations that put in. And notice when you use the auto tool that the software puts in quite a few. And I'm noticing now that in this area here where that sort of the split started to happen, the stitches seem a little bit kind of, confused, if you will. They're not as smooth. And so that is noticeable in the stitching. And notice if I just smooth that out, how that cleaned up that stitching there. And so if you're using the auto, you kind of need to pay attention to how are the inclinations going. Perhaps a more predictable way of using it is, so let's just click back on the artwork tool to kind of like erase that. And this time we'll click on the regular satin on the left hand side where it just says Satin Path. And what happens is now is it waits for me to put the inclinations in myself. And so in this case, I'll say, well, let's put one in to match that side and one in to match that side. And I don't know if I need much more than one in between. The software will turn gradually from this yellow inclination to this yellow inclination, and then gradually from that one. And so it helps the software to know, by the way, let's also right click and then move the exit point to either match up with the entry point or be kind of on the opposite side. Either one would be fine, but there's no reason to have the exit point inside of the shape because that would cause the software to stitch down to the exit point, walk to the other side, and stitch back down to the exit point. And so by putting the exit point, and the entry point at the same place, then it says the software will jump, 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 tie in right here, do all of the underlying stitches, then do all of the cover stitches, and finish right back where you started again. So if you are trimming with your scissors, it's the same scissor snip. One scissor snip can snip both the trail thread in and out. Of course, most of us have an automatic thread trimmer, so that might not matter. But what I do like to do is try and get them to end on one side or the other so that your stitching is continuous and flows all the way across. Yeah, so I would have chosen the Satin Path and then switched to probably, I think it might have been pattern 2 that I used for this design. Let's take a look and see. Yeah, so I had set the design at pattern 2. Of course, if you ever like something in one of the designs that we create for a monthly club, all you've got to do is click on the parts of it and you can inspect the parameters. So here you can see that for the eyes, we used a pattern fill, whereas for the kind of feathers up top, we used a satin fill. They're both turning stitches. And so you can see that they all say Satin Path. The question is, did I use the Satin Path or did I change it to a pattern fill? And in this case, I think the feeling was that the pattern fill kind of flattened those feathers and they look nicer with the split satins. And so really it's, maybe your opinion is different. And if you want to stitch this out and you'd rather have them be in the standard fills or the turning pattern fills, you can make those edits yourselves, of course. So notice when I select on these shapes that the parameters was a satin fill with a 0.5 density, and the other parameter that was set was the random split, 7 millimeters. If you look in the pull compensation, you'll often find 0.2. Doesn't look like I put any on it this time. And if you look in the underlay, you'll often find a parallel, or at times I may even add a contour to that. So let's look at that. If I turn off the 3D and then kind of zoom in, so if I undo, there you can see the difference, right? As this color stitches, there's a parallel underlay and then a cover stitch, and it would not be wrong to also include, especially with the size of this column being quite wide, a contour which will give the underlay two passes. One will travel around the outside, and the second one will fill the body. And so the one that travels around the outside is going to help clean off the edges of your stitches and make them look nice and sharp, especially if you're having two colors that sort of touched each other, like if these two things were actually meant to be touching, then that run stitch also stops your thread from sinking into a lower layer. And so, yeah. Now, while we're at it, I get a lot of questions about my workspace and how I've got the properties box and the sequence view side by side. And when I go shopping for the designs in my design tab, I've got a nice big design space. And I just want to point out that, of course, it's the toolbars menu down at the bottom. Tell all your friends about repeat work or reset workspace, because it's the most commonly asked question is what happened to my slow redraw toolbar? And sometimes it gets confused and it seems to just like disappear. And anytime anything seems amiss about your tools on your tool space, you can use the toolbars drop down menu for workspaces. And if you choose reset, it puts everything back to the factory defaults. Now, I've got some of my own saved workspaces because, of course, I like to customize them. And so I've got one, my new favorite workspace. And what that'll do is move the properties box here and the sequence bar there, and it expands the size of the designs and library windows for me, as well as it put my total quilter tools over on the left. And so what I'm trying to tell you is a lot of people have asked. They see the videos that I record and wonder how we do that. Now, I have recorded about it, but it's been well over a year since the last time I mentioned it. It doesn't take long to learn it, but essentially yours probably will start out looking like this, right? Workspace, reset workspace. So there's two things you need to understand if you want to have your workspace rearranged, especially if you want to rearrange the properties and the sequence view and the library icons, because they'll come in locked by default. You can't move them. But if you look in the program preferences under the environment, the view tab, there's an option to lock the properties, sequence view, and library windows. And you'll need to uncheck that. And as soon as that is unchecked, you'll notice that you have the ability to, for example, when you're browsing for designs, to come right to that little gray line right there and make it bigger, and make it as big as you want. Leave a little bit of room so that when you're hovering over the designs and you find one you want to stitch, you can bring it onto your workspace. Now, black doesn't seem as appropriate anymore because the black hat kind of hides on it, but you can see what I'm talking about. So the idea is if you wanted to make the properties and the sequence view side by side, now that you've unlocked them, you can go onto the gray part at the top of the properties box and click and drag to separate it. And if I just let go for a minute, it's going to be a floating properties box. And so it'll always stay wherever I place it. And you can place it anywhere you want. Notice when I'm moving it around, the little gray squares that come in the middle here, they also come over on the sides. I'll do it again when I click and drag properties. Notice those little gray, I call them landing pads. I don't know what they're meant to be, but if I put my mouse over it, it shows me where it's going to go. And so if you want to have your properties box occupy the bottom of your workspace, you could. Maybe you'd rather it on the left. How about up top? Or where I actually put it was over here on this landing pad, which is tied to the side. That's where it was, and I simply moved it to there. So now they're side by side, and the only other thing that I did was I wanted to be able to see the whole reason I did this was I really like to have a full view of my sequence view. You may be on a desktop and having them top and bottom works great. But for me on my sort of squished, workspace for my little laptop, I like putting them side by side so I can see all the colors and see my properties box at the same time. So that's just for me. You don't have to do it, but if you want to, what I did do is I moved this over, making more room for the sequence view. And so by, I guess, just clicking and dragging to move the properties box over, you can even click and drag right here to bring the sequence view over and tighten it up. And so now I've got a lot of space for my sequence view and my properties box, and not quite as much space for my area in the middle to work. If you always worked in black, or if you wanted to have a different color for your workspace, of course, that tool Now, kind of hidden down here, notice in my little workspace how having these tools go down, some of them are hanging off the bottom, and there's a little sort of more triangle right there that I can click on to see, oh, there's the tool for background colors. I hadn't seen it for a while. And so, I could go in and change my background color. And now we can save that if we want and always have an orange background and always have a side by side. And the way you would save it is you would go back to the toolbars drop down menu and workspaces and choose and choose save workspace. And we'll call this one the turkey workspace. And it'll always have an orange background and side by side. So another thing I like to do, just as an example, toolbars, workspaces, sketching. So when I do my thread sketches, I want more workspace and I'm not really working on the sequence of the properties view. And so notice when I go to sketching that I have a workspace where I've actually closed the properties box and I've minimized the space for the sequence view and maximized my area for sketching with. And so if I'm sitting down to do a thread sketch, I choose that thread palette or that workspace. And when I'm doing my normal kind of everyday editing and working on things, I like my new favorite workspace. Anyway, you guys, yeah, maybe I'm wrong about the colors, and maybe the colors don't save with the workspace. Let's find out. Color and make it back to just plain old white for a minute. And then if I choose toolbars and workspace and the turkey workspace, it will switch everything, but yeah, not the color orange. So I was wrong on that part. The color orange will basically, when you change the color of your background, it'll simply stay that color. You can also put a fabric back here if you want to. The software doesn't come with a ton of fabrics, but of course you could browse around and select any image that you want as your background. And so now I've got a purple kind of fabric looking image in the background. So you could actually kind of visualize your designs on, the actual color that you plan to stitch on. Yeah. Anyway, you guys, I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving on Thursday, and I hope you guys have a wonderful holiday season coming up. Thanks for watching today. Hope you enjoyed the video, and bye for now.